Caiden Hill was 13 when his teacher ripped up his math notebook in front of the whole class, said genius doesn't come in your color. The next day, Caiden solved a problem NASA had labeled impossible. But when the proof went viral, a white professor claimed it as his own, and the world believed him. What Caiden did next made history, and enemies in every Ivy League boardroom. But no one expected what he uncovered inside Harvard's archives. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. 12-year-old Caiden Hill had learned early that in his Mississippi town, the fastest way to get laughed at was to show you were smarter than the world expected. A black boy to be, but he still didn't expect the explosion of mockery that filled his 7th grade algebra classroom. The moment he quietly murmured, almost too softly to hear, "I actually love math more than basketball." He hadn't meant it as a statement, only a simple truth he had carried like a fragile treasure. But the second his words floated into the air, a roar of laughter burst across the room as if he had confessed the most ridiculous secret possible. Caiden sat there stiff, already feeling heat crawl up his neck as Desmond, the boy behind him, slapped his desk and cackled. "Man, ain't nobody love math like that, especially you," while another student sneered, "You trying to sound smart now?" Caiden didn't look up. He never did when the room turned against him. But the sound that hurt the most wasn't the teasing. It was the soft chuckle from Mr. Dorsey, the white teacher who leaned against his desk with his arms crossed as if the whole thing were harmless fun. All right, Mr. Dorsey said, still smiling. "Let's get back to the lesson. We all know Caiden's got big dreams." His tone carried the same gentle condescension someone would use for a child who announced he wanted to fly to the moon using cardboard wings. Caiden swallowed hard, staring at the equation on the board, the numbers blurring for a moment before snapping back sharply into place. Numbers always did that for him. They snapped, aligned, behaved, unlike people. He whispered under his breath, "Why is it funny to love something?" And Mr. Dorsey, overhearing, responded with a careless shrug, "Because you're full of surprises, Caiden. But let's focus on the things you're more likely to use." It stung sharper than any insult, because he'd heard versions of that his whole life. The world didn't care how quickly he could see patterns or how naturally equations formed shapes in his mind, or how he could solve problems most adults stumbled through. People looked at him and saw the same thing every time, a black boy with potential that no one believed would matter. His mother, Denise Hill, always told him, "Baby, the world don't always clap when you shine, but shine anyway." And he genuinely tried. Sitting at their old kitchen table every night with a cracked notebook, the one he had taped 3 times and refused to replace because it held every pattern he'd discovered since he was 9. But the world around him constantly reminded him what it thought of black brilliance. Even during a gifted placement test the previous year, the administrator, an older white man with a bored expression, had glanced at his results and muttered, "Well, this is unusual. Statistically, you don't see this often," as if Caiden's intellect were some kind of glitch in the system. Caiden pretended not to understand at the time, but he did. He always understood. And some nights when the house was quiet and his mother's exhausted breathing drifted down the hallway, after a double shift, Caiden would escape into numbers, scribbling formulas, reworking problems from textbooks far above his grade, and inventing his own equations when the world of school felt too small. His brain didn't process math like steps, it felt more like music, except he was the only one who could hear it. When he looked at graphs, they bent toward each other like dancers. When he looked at inequalities, they became competing forces pulling and pushing. When he solved equations, the solutions clicked like locks opening, revealing hidden doors only he could see. It made him feel alive, powerful, and for once seen, but only by the universe, never by people. That night after the classroom incident, Caiden sat at the table, trying to ignore the sting of being laughed at again, telling himself it didn't matter. He told himself he didn't care. But something inside him felt cracked, something he didn't have the words for. And when his mother noticed the silence in his usual scribbling, she paused while washing dishes and asked, "Rough day?" He didn't want to burden her, but she knew anyway. "Baby," she said gently, "don't let small minds tell you how big you can dream." Caiden forced a nod, opened his notebook again, and tried to drown in the comfort of numbers. He flipped to a clean page and began working on a problem he had been building for weeks. Something he didn't quite understand yet but felt deeply drawn to, an equation involving pattern anomalies, ratios and structural expansion prediction. It didn't come from homework or any book. It emerged from him, forming piece by piece, page by page, like a picture developing slowly in water. Hours passed. He scribbled so intensely that his pencil kept breaking. Midnight turned into 1. By the time his hand ached and the pencil smudges covered his fingers, Caiden realized he had completed something Something big. He didn't know how to name it, but he knew it worked. It predicted cascading failure patterns in lattice structures with unprecedented accuracy, something he didn't know engineers at the highest national levels struggled with. Caiden didn't even realize how groundbreaking it was. He just knew it made sense. And because he had no one to show, he uploaded a rough copy to an open-source math forum using a throwaway username, assuming maybe one or two math hobbyists would enjoy it. He went to sleep tired, still carrying the ache of humiliation from earlier, unaware that his late-night escape into numbers had just triggered a ripple he couldn't control. By morning the post had exploded, comments from university-level mathematicians arguing over its authenticity, messages asking for clarification, debates over whether it was AI-generated or plagiarized. Caiden didn't respond to any of them. He wasn't even awake, but someone else was. A federal analyst at the Department of Defense scrolling through flagged math posts at 5:43 a.m. paused, frowned, zoomed in on the equations and whispered, "Who the hell solved this?" By 7:12 a.m., a formal inquiry was opened. By 9, the post had been sent to 3 military research units for verification. By 11:29 a.m., Caiden's throwaway username landed in a restricted briefing file, and at 4:07, while Caiden sat on his porch eating leftover cornbread, still thinking about the way everyone had laughed at him, a government official left a voicemail on his mother's phone requesting urgent contact regarding a mathematical submission posted by an individual in your household. Caiden didn't even know yet that the world was about to treat him very differently, but not better, not kinder, not safer. The brilliance they once mocked was now something they wanted to control, and he had no idea that the first call would be followed by others, or that the attention wouldn't come from people who wanted to celebrate him, but from people who wanted to claim him. Because before the sun set that evening, the Department of Defense had traced the submission to the Hill residence and prepared to reach out again with far more force. And Caiden, still sitting quietly with his notebook, unaware that his life had already changed, couldn't possibly predict that solving one equation would put him in the crosshairs of the most powerful institution in the country. But one equation he solved triggered a call from the Department of Defense. 3 weeks after the Department of Defense call went unanswered, due to Caiden's mother assuming it was a scam, an unexpected email arrived in her inbox bearing the crimson seal of Harvard University, an official invitation to their elite summer pre-college program, signed by the Department of Mathematics. Denise nearly deleted it, thinking it had to be spam, but when she clicked the sender out of curiosity and read the words again, selected for exceptional mathematical insight, her breath caught. Caiden had just turned 15, and though the viral Reddit thread about his equation had gained quiet traction in niche academic circles, he hadn't expected it to reach Ivy League eyes, let alone trigger a formal invitation. They offered a full scholarship, housing, travel, and even a stipend. To his mother it felt like a divine reward after years of silence, struggle, and overlooked brilliance. Caiden was nervous but quietly hopeful. He'd imagined Harvard since he was 10, long before he knew the name meant more than just books. It meant power, prestige, and proof that his gift was real. But the moment he stepped into that towering lecture hall in Cambridge, wearing the only dress shirt he owned and carrying his patched-up notebook like armor, he felt it not awe but scrutiny. Eyes turned, not with admiration, but suspicion. He was the youngest there, and the only black student in the advanced mathematics cohort. Conversation stopped when he entered, and though the other students avoided staring, their silences were sharper than words. During the orientation, when students were asked to introduce themselves and list their math interests, Caiden confidently said, "I've been working on lattice prediction and recursive modeling," and a student behind him snickered. "Since when?" "Middle school." Caiden didn't respond, but it wasn't the students that made his stomach twist. It was the expression on Dr. Ellery, the senior professor overseeing the program, who narrowed his eyes at Caiden not with curiosity, but calculation. That first day, Ellery asked Caiden to stay after for a few moments alone. In the hollow quiet of the room, the professor leaned forward and said with a too smooth tone, "You know, we've had a lot of, inflated stories online lately. Some kids get lucky, others get misunderstood. We like to verify things here." Caiden felt the implication under every syllable. "You don't belong here, and I don't believe you." Before he could respond, Dr. Ellery placed a sealed folder on the desk and said, "This is a problem that's never been solved. We've given it to dozens of students, grad-level minds. No one's come close. Consider it a warm-up, no pressure." Caiden opened the folder, and his chest tightened, not from fear but recognition. The problem was tangled, dense, written with the kind of precision that almost dared him to flinch. But Caiden's mind didn't flinch. As he sat in the dorm that night, staring at the question with his cracked notebook beside him, something happened. The problem began to unwind itself, not in language but in images. He saw movement, sequences, functions, folding over each other, as if the problem wanted to be solved. Hours passed. He barely blinked. The next morning, he walked into Dr. Ellery's office and placed 5 handwritten pages on the desk. It's not just solvable, Caiden said. The structure's flawed. The third assumption negates the convergence principle. Ellery stared at the papers without touching them. For a beat too long, he didn't speak. Then he said, "Wait outside." Caiden sat on the bench outside the office, watching elite students walk past him, as if he were invisible. 30 minutes turned to an hour. Finally, Dr. Ellery emerged, his expression unreadable, and said, "You may have misunderstood the purpose of the assignment. This wasn't meant to be graded, but we'll review it." The warmth of opportunity had turned cold, replaced by the chill of academic politics. Later that afternoon, in a closed meeting, 3 faculty members huddled around Caiden's work. It wasn't just accurate, it contained a correction to an error buried deep in Harvard's archives, an equation thought to be airtight, originally published in a 2000. Caiden had, without realizing it, exposed a flaw that had sat undisputed for 23 years, yet instead of praise the faculty debated damage control. "He's a minor. No one knows him. We can publish a correction quietly," one said. Another muttered, "This will open us to scrutiny." How did no one catch this for 2 decades? Dr. Ellery said nothing at first, then finally added, "He's gifted, but if this goes public with his name on it, it won't be about the math. It'll be a circus. Let's be cautious." Caiden, still in the dark, received an email thanking him for his critical engagement with advanced material. No mention of the correction, no mention of the breakthrough, no offer to publish. When he asked about feedback, he was told, "Your submission is under internal review." But that night, while browsing the math subreddit he once posted on, Caiden noticed something odd. A new post, titled "Harvard Summer Student Solves Long-Standing Error," with a screenshot of a problem nearly identical to the one he'd solved. It didn't credit anyone. It didn't mention a name, but it was his work line for line. Comments poured in. Some marveled at the insight. Others dismissed it as impossible, claiming no one that young could have caught it. Caiden sat in the dim dorm light, heart pounding, realizing the truth. They didn't just test him. They set a trap. They wanted the answer, not the boy who solved it. He thought about his mom, working 2 jobs back home, bragging to her coworkers that her baby made it to Harvard. He thought about that folder slammed on the desk like a challenge, the whispers when he walked in, the stiff smiles, the missing name, and something inside him, something sharp, quiet and rising, refused to accept invisibility. Caiden not only passed it, he found an error Harvard had missed for 20. The week after Caiden's solution surfaced anonymously across Harvard's internal math circles, the energy on campus shifted, not with celebration but with static like the air before a storm. Professors no longer looked through him. Now they paused mid-conversation when he walked by, their eyes calculating. Graduate students stared longer, some with awe, others with something colder behind their glances. What no one knew publicly yet was that Caiden's equation didn't just correct an overlooked academic flaw. It dismantled the foundation of a widely celebrated theorem, used in structural engineering simulations, one that had underpinned scholarly textbooks, government simulations, and even corporate algorithm patents for over 2 decades. By identifying a flawed assumption nested deep inside the original framework, Caiden hadn't just pointed out a mistake, he rewrote the language. A single, unassuming teen from Mississippi had just outperformed every doctorate-holding mathematician who had ever touched the problem. But in elite academic circles, genius isn't always welcomed, especially when it comes from someone they didn't groom, didn't expect, and couldn't control. Instead of acclaim, came doubt. The whispers hardened into strategy. In a faculty meeting, a white professor named Vix called Caiden's solution reckless extrapolation, suggesting it might be a statistical fluke, or worse, an imitation. The most praised mind of the department, a published expert named Dr. Lennox, called the results provocative but unproven in a campus newsletter. And when a forum post attempted to share Caiden's full write-up, it was deleted within minutes. Offline, things got sharper. During an evening seminar where Caiden attempted to share his process, only 3 students showed up. 2 left within 5 minutes. The last never made eye contact. When Caiden later found a flyer with the words, "Not your genius," scribbled across his dorm door, his shoulders slumped, but his spirit didn't break. Not yet. He didn't have anyone to talk to, not the professors, not the students, until one night while walking across the west side of campus, deep in thought, he heard a voice call out, "Kid, You don't walk through this alley unless you want to see ghosts. Startled, Caiden turned and saw an older black man sweeping near the base of a limestone archway, wearing a faded Harvard facilities badge. The man smirked and added, "But maybe you already have." That was how Caiden met Royce Mitchell, officially a janitor, unofficially a forgotten legend. Royce, broad-shouldered and deliberate, had eyes like someone who'd watched every promise ever made to him get walked back. Over the next few days, they started talking more. Royce always spoke like he was peeling the truth slowly, testing if Caiden could handle it. Eventually he said, "I read what you wrote, back when I had an ID that worked in that building." Caiden blinked. "You read it?" Royce nodded. "I solved that same problem in not the same way, but I saw the whole, published it in a small journal, didn't even get a rejection, just silence. A month later I was removed from my research assistantship. No explanation, just gone." Caiden's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Royce's voice hard. "You think Harvard listens when a black boy's right, and the rest of them are wrong? They don't correct you, they erase you." That conversation unlocked something in Caiden, and broke something too. He realized what he was up against wasn't just ego or envy, it was institutional silence masquerading as skepticism. He began receiving emails from unknown accounts claiming he had used ghostwriting services, even though every line of math was scrawled in his own notebook. A faculty member cornered him in the hallway and asked, "Do you really expect us to believe you did this alone?" When Caiden replied quietly, "No one helped me," the professor scoffed and walked away. Online, the math subreddit that once admired his thinking now swirled with claims that he'd copied from Russian academic databases. The usernames were new, the energy felt coordinated, even his old Reddit post was flagged and removed for suspicious content. Caiden went to Royce again and asked, "How do they do it? How do they bury people so quietly?" Royce looked him dead in the eye and said, "Because they've had practice. They don't need to kill your name, they just need to keep it from ever being spoken." Then, Royce pulled out something Caiden never expected, a faded file folder with yellowed pages, his own equations from decades ago, eerily similar to Caiden's, with annotations and margin notes. "I brought this to a professor once," Royce said, voice thick with memory. He smiled, said he'd get back to me. A week later, the same work showed up in a conference under someone else's name. I confronted him. 2 days later I got a call. My funding was restructured. Next semester I was off campus, never came back. Caiden stared at the page. His hands trembled. "You're telling me they've done this before?" Royce nodded. "They don't care about the math, son. They care about who's allowed to be the genius." That night, Caiden sat in his dorm and copied Royce's old equations next to his own. The resemblance was haunting. Two black minds, two different generations, both seeing a flaw the academic elite missed, and both punished for it. The next morning, he decided to submit his proof under his real name to a public math repository. Not Harvard's, not internal public, an open-source platform that preserved timestamps and authorship metadata. Within 24 hours, the submission had been viewed over 10,000 times, shared across Twitter, and debated in underground academic blogs. Then came the backlash. The Harvard administration issued a vague statement warning students about violations of academic publishing protocol. The dean sent an email to Caiden's mother implying disciplinary action might occur for unauthorized public release of in-progress academic work. Royce read the letter and laughed dryly. "They're not mad you shared it. They're mad you did it before they could steal it." But as the views climbed and independent scholars began validating the proof, one thing became clear: Harvard couldn't hide it anymore. And Caiden, once mocked in his hometown for loving math more than basketball, had become the face of a silent rebellion. Still, Royce looked uneasy. He leaned closer one afternoon and whispered, "You don't know the half of it. What you found, that error. I found it too. And when I tried to expose it," he paused, swallowed, eyes darker than before. "I wasn't just ignored, I was blacklisted. Every program, every job, and I've got the rejection letters to prove it." Royce had proof he once exposed the same truth and was blacklisted for life. The day after Royce revealed the rejection letters, worn, creased, and still holding the cold sting of erasure, Caiden sat silently in the back of Harvard's East Library, surrounded by stained glass windows and quiet chandeliers that looked like they'd never known a storm. His hands shook as he flipped through the brittle papers. "We regret to inform you, your work does not align with current research priorities. We are unable to consider your application at this time." All dated between 1999 and 2002. Some came from schools Royce had never even applied to. Caiden felt a slow, burning nausea rise in his chest as the pattern became clear, not just rejection, but coordinated suppression. Royce hadn't been dismissed for lack of merit. He had been disappeared for being right while black. And now Caiden was watching the same machinery creak to life around him. What stung wasn't just the silence from faculty or the whispers about cheating or coincidence. It was the knowledge that his name was being kept out of emails, his existence omitted from meetings where his work was being discussed. A few students even began parroting phrases, like Caiden didn't originate that math, or it's based on older drafts, as if the institution was rewriting the narrative before it even settled. Royce, noticing the shadows closing in again, became more cautious but more determined. One evening he sat beside Caiden on a campus bench and laid everything bare. In '98, I presented the original framework for that proof during a departmental roundtable. You know what they told me? He didn't wait for an answer. We strongly encourage you to reconsider publication. This kind of math presented by someone like you could cause reputational confusion. Royce laughed bitterly. Reputational confusion. I was too black to be that smart without stirring the pot. He paused, then leaned close. When I refused to retract it, the grant I was working under vanished. The faculty mentor I'd trusted disappeared. My file was flagged, and within months I was academically disqualified for underperformance. I never got below an A in my life. Caiden listened, fists clenched so hard his knuckles ached. They didn't just take your math, he said slowly. They took your voice. Royce nodded, then added with a twisted smile, until now, because your voice brought my proof back from the dead. But that resurrection came with a price. Harvard began quietly increasing pressure. Caiden's access to advanced lab equipment was suddenly under review. His campus credentials failed randomly. He was pulled aside by a faculty advisor and asked to reconsider aggressive publishing without peer oversight. The word peer hung heavy, a gate wrapped in velvet. Still, Caiden refused to back down. He digitized his notes, uploaded backups to multiple encrypted drives, and shared them with Royce. If they try to bury this, he said, it won't stay buried. But the walls were closing in faster than he expected. One morning, Caiden received an anonymous email from a concerned academic ally. The message was brief, clinical. You're not imagining the suppression. Some are trying to help, but you need protection. If you want your proof published, we can assist under one condition. Your name must not appear. Caiden reread the message 5 times. His vision blurred. The words hit harder than any insult ever could. Harvard didn't want to silence the equation. They wanted to erase its author. Royce, reading over his shoulder, didn't speak for a full minute. Then he muttered, they don't mind the truth, as long as it comes from the right color mouth. The threat wasn't subtle. They would let the math live, just not the legacy. Caiden felt a storm rise inside him, louder than the fear, stronger than the humiliation. They want to use my mind and bury my name, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'd rather they burn it all than let them whitewash it. But Royce, eyes heavy with the wariness of someone who once thought the same, placed a hand on Caiden's shoulder. Don't throw the fire yet. Let's show them you're not alone. Because if they think you're just a boy with a blog, they'll crush you. But if we find the others, if we make it loud, they won't be able to contain it. Caiden didn't know what the others meant yet, but he knew one thing with chilling clarity. This wasn't about math anymore. It was about control. And now he had to decide: vanish quietly, or fight loudly. An anonymous professor offered to publish Caiden's work, but only if his name was removed. Caiden didn't want to agree. Every fiber of his being screamed not to. But late that night, after staring at the anonymous professor's email for hours, the weight of everything, his mom's second job, Royce's broken dreams, the relentless online hate, and the quiet ever-present fear of being swallowed whole by Harvard's machine, pushed him to type 2 words he knew would haunt him. I agree. The terms were simple, sterile, and brutal. His name would be omitted. The paper would be published as part of a broader departmental review. His contribution folded into collaborative insights, curated under the name of Dr. Edwin Moore, a white-tenured professor with decades of published work but no recent breakthroughs. The email thanked Caiden for his maturity and discretion. It read like a eulogy. The next week, the paper dropped on a major academic site, titled Structural Reassessment of Nonlinear Predictive Modeling in Lattice Systems. It exploded in mathematical circles. It was described as game-changing, a Renaissance-level discovery, and a rare feat of intellectual clarity. MIT professors cited it within days. Newsletters praised Harvard's cutting-edge math minds. Dr. Edwin Moore was invited onto a podcast titled Genius at Work, where he modestly chuckled. We were lucky. Sometimes ideas bloom when you least expect them. Caiden watched it alone in the dorm bathroom, knees pulled to his chest. His name wasn't mentioned once. Not even a "we had help," just smiles, praise and polite dishonesty wrapped in the language of prestige. At first he told himself it didn't matter. The math was out there. The truth in some form had survived. But the more the applause grew, the deeper the wound cut. A thread on Reddit labeled Dr. Moore as the next Einstein, and the top comment read, "Nice to see real minds making real contributions. No TikTok frauds." That last line stung, because when Caiden anonymously commented, "Sometimes the real minds get hidden," a reply came within seconds. "Cry hard. Real talent doesn't need to hide." Then the trolls came. Someone linked a conspiracy video claiming Caiden had hacked Moore's files and was trying to steal credit. His DMs filled with racist mockery, calling him a dropout playing genius, affirmative action trash, and worse. They sent fake screenshots of imaginary plagiarism reports. Some even emailed his mother's job, accusing her son of academic fraud. She came home early that Friday, pale, shaking. "Baby, why are people saying you threatened a professor?" Caiden couldn't answer. His silence was as loud as the lies. Royce begged him to fight. "Don't let them build a legacy off your blood," he said, slamming a stack of old journals on the table. "This is your name. Your damn name." But Caiden, hollowed by the storm, whispered, "If I say anything now, they'll destroy me. I'll be just another angry black boy they get rid of quietly." For a while he stayed quiet. Until one night, 3 weeks later, a whistleblower reached out through an encrypted app. The message read, "You don't know me, but I saw the email." Moore admitted he didn't write the paper. "I can prove it." Attached was a single screenshot, an internal message from Dr. Moore to another faculty member. "Brilliant proof. Can't believe a kid solved it. But let's be honest, no one's going to accept a teenager from Mississippi. If we want it published, it has to come from me. You know how this works." Caiden's breath stopped. He read the line again and again, each time feeling a fresh wave of heat rise in his chest. There it was. The truth in plain words. Not even subtle. Not even ashamed. But the email didn't go public. The person who sent it had tried to report it to the dean, but was told, "We will investigate internally." The leak died in silence. The lie remained. Moore continued basking in the glow of unearned genius, and Caiden's name remained a ghost behind the mask. A leaked email showed the professor admitted the work wasn't his, but the university buried it. The leak should have been the turning point, the moment the lie cracked wide open, and Caiden was finally seen for who he was. But truth is only as powerful as the platform willing to carry it, and Harvard's machinery had long mastered the art of redirection. So when that email screenshot quietly circulated among a few student activists in mid-tier forums, it didn't spark a scandal. It sparked a whisper. But it wasn't until a podcast host known for stirring controversy dropped an offhand comment during an episode titled "The Young and the Genius" that the storm truly erupted. Midway through the conversation about Dr. Moore's revolutionary math, the host leaned in and said, "There's a rumor the real author was some black teenager from Mississippi. Makes you wonder, right?" The line, said with just enough smirk to keep plausible deniability, detonated across social media like gasoline on dry grass. Within hours, TikTok clips, Reddit threads, and Twitter debates spiraled out of control. But the curiosity didn't lead to justice. It led to a witch hunt. Racist accounts swarmed to the phrase "black teenager from Mississippi" like predators catching scent. And because no one in power confirmed the rumor or denied it online, sleuths began investigating. Their version of research meant doxing every visible black math student they could find. Names, photos, GPA screenshots, TikTok compilation. Some were completely unrelated students who now received death threats for being liars. Others were tagged in fake confessions. And Caiden, who had been trying to lay low in hopes the university would eventually fix the injustice, woke up to a nightmare. His middle school yearbook photo was posted alongside his Reddit username. His cracked math notebook, the same one he loved like a lifeline, was dissected by strangers who claimed, "No way a teenager wrote this unless he stole it." His address, which he'd never shared publicly, appeared in a tweet that read, "Let's make him famous." Denise found out at work when a woman called the front desk pretending to be from the school board, then screamed, "You raised a fraud," before hanging up. That afternoon, Denise was called into HR. Her manager, nervous and apologetic, told her they'd received several anonymous threats. We don't feel comfortable with the attention right now," he mumbled, sliding a termination form across the desk. Caiden came home to find his mother sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. She didn't cry. She never did when it hurt the most. She just said softly, "They took my job, baby." Over lies. Caiden sat next to her and stared at his hands. "It's my fault," he whispered. "No, It's theirs, she snapped, her voice sharp but trembling. It's always been theirs. Meanwhile, the online fury escalated. Harvard issued no statements. Dr. Moore declined interviews citing online harassment. And in the absence of official truth, the lie flourished. News sites ran with vague headlines. Debate over math authorship sparks racial tension online. Caiden tried posting his proof again, this time with a time-stamped video showing his own writing. It was flagged as potential misinformation. Even allies in the academic world seemed hesitant. One well-known math influencer tweeted, "If true, this team deserves justice. But let's not rush to judgment without evidence." The irony nearly crushed Caiden. He was the evidence, and yet his existence was treated like a variable to be debated, not a person to be believed. One night Royce showed up at Caiden's dorm, furious. "You're not hiding anymore," he said, shoving a printed flyer into his hands. "Look at this." It was a promotional poster for the upcoming Northeast Math Scholars Conference, a major event in Boston attended by top academics. At the center of the flyer, Dr. Edwin Moore, keynote speaker. Topic: Rewriting Foundations, a new approach to predictive modeling. Beneath his face in small elegant print, the most significant advancement in modern lattice mathematics. Caiden felt like the ground had dropped beneath him. "He's presenting my work," he whispered. Royce didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence screamed louder than anything. But then came the twist. Royce handed Caiden a second flyer. It was a delegate pass. One of Royce's old friends, still loosely connected to academia, had anonymously registered Caiden under a neutral name as a student observer. "They want to use your work as a trophy," Royce said. "Go there and remind them it has a heart." Caiden stared at the pass, heart pounding, mind racing. He knew the risk. He knew the smear campaign would only get worse. But now it wasn't just about him. It was about every black kid whose name got replaced in fine print. Every genius whose proof got filtered through a white face to make it palatable. Every mother who lost a job because her son dared to be brilliant in the wrong body. And this time he wasn't going to sit back and watch. A math conference invited the fake professor to keynote, and Caiden decided to confront him in person. The morning of the Northeast Math Scholars Conference was crisp and bright, but Caiden's stomach churned as if the sky itself were about to split. He wore the only blazer Royce could find him. 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowed his wrists, and the collar scratched his neck. Still, it didn't matter. Today wasn't about how he looked. It was about finally being seen. He held the delegate pass tightly in his hand, the one that read C. Harris, Student Observer, and moved through the lobby of the Boston Convention Hall with a purpose so quiet it trembled. The hall was a sea of prestige, oak-paneled walls, velvet ropes, name tags etched in gold lettering. Men with gray hair and glasses spoke in lowered tones, chuckling over catered coffee and abstract theory. But behind the smiles, Caiden saw what Royce had warned him about: the machine, the club, the fortress that welcomed your genius, only if it didn't come from skin like his. When the keynote began, Caiden slipped into the last row of the massive lecture hall, heart pounding in his ears. Dr. Edwin Moore stepped onto the stage like a king approaching his throne. The applause was immediate, curated, and hollow. Caiden's hands trembled as he opened his cracked notebook. He had brought it not for comfort, but as proof, the very object they said didn't exist. As Moore launched into his presentation, projecting equations and talking points across the stage, Caiden waited, watching every movement, every pause. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Dr. Moore, despite rehearsing someone else's work for weeks, stumbled through the deeper logic of the theorem. He misused terminology. He hesitated when asked about variable convergence. And then during a particularly technical segment, he skipped a critical step entirely. "As you can see here," Moore said, pointing to the screen, "we simplify the function using, well, recursive backflow." Caiden felt the air leave his lungs. Recursive backflow wasn't even a real method. The crowd shifted. Some professors exchanged glances. Royce had told him, the lie could only survive silence. And at that moment, silence was complicity. Caiden stood. A quiet ripple moved through the room. A few heads turned. Moore didn't notice. Caiden took one step forward, then another. "Excuse me," he said, voice cracking but rising. Moore stopped. The room turned. A few gasps. A moderator whispered something into their mic. Caiden kept walking until he reached the center aisle. "The equation on slide 16, Caiden said louder, "is flawed. The simplification skips vector alignment entirely." Moore blinked. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" Caiden stepped closer. "I'm the one who wrote the proof you're butchering." The silence was violent. No one moved. A woman near the front audibly whispered, "Is that the kid?" Caiden didn't wait. He climbed onto the small stage, pulled the marker from Moore's hand, and turned to the massive whiteboard behind them. "This is what you skipped," he said, and with fierce fluid strokes, began reconstructing the missing piece. His handwriting filled the board like lightning. Functions nested inside functions, ratios reconciled, variables aligned. The room was dead still. One professor muttered, "My God." Moore looked like he'd been slapped. That's not," he stammered. "You don't belong on this stage." Caiden turned to face him. "But my math does, and you've been stealing it." The moderator stepped forward, whispering into a walkie-talkie. Caiden turned back to the crowd. "Harvard didn't just erase my name. They gave my work to a man who doesn't understand it. And they've been doing this to black minds for decades." Applause started, hesitant at first, then building. But before it could take root, two security guards stormed the stage. One grabbed Caiden's arm. He didn't resist, only held his notebook tighter as they pulled him away. The moderator tried to calm the crowd. Moore stood frozen, humiliated but protected. As Caiden was dragged through the side exit, a young professor, one who had stayed silent through it all, stood up and shouted, "Wait, let him finish." But the door slammed before anyone else joined in. In the hallway, Royce waited. "You did it," he whispered. Caiden's eyes burned. "Yeah," he said, "but at what cost?" A viral clip of the incident spread, and suddenly the truth was too big to bear. The clip hit Twitter before the security guards even got Caiden to the conference stairwell. A grainy phone video, filmed from the third row, captured the entire moment. A teenage black boy walking to the front of a packed hall, correcting a tenured white professor's flawed explanation, then stepping to the board and unraveling a complex proof live, while the room looked on in stunned silence. The last 5 seconds, him declaring, "Harvard gave my work to a man who doesn't understand it," hit like lightning. Within 2 hours, the video was clipped, edited, subtitled, and uploaded across every platform. Credit Caiden trended by nightfall. Overnight, something shifted, not just on the timeline, but in the culture. This wasn't just a math controversy anymore. It was a reckoning. Dozens of black mathematicians, from undergrad students to retired scholars, posted their own stories of erasure, misattribution, and academic gatekeeping. Some admitted they had left academia entirely after similar betrayal. Others shared screenshots of Caiden's proof beside Moore's published paper, highlighting the undeniable overlaps, the identical structuring, even the margin calculations that Caiden had written in his own hand. The math community, long a closed circle, was now under a blinding spotlight. Activists latched on fast, demanding Harvard address the scandal. Petitions exploded, podcasts debated it. TikTok creators broke down the racism behind collaborative authorship. The movement was emotional, visceral, and loud, but with visibility came venom. Harvard released a sterile, vague statement, acknowledging possible misattributions in an internal academic paper, and promised an inquiry. They never named Caiden. They never named Moore. The words race and theft were nowhere in sight. That non-response only fueled the rage. Meanwhile, Caiden, still reeling from the chaos of the conference, was thrust into the center of a war he hadn't asked to fight. His phone didn't stop buzzing. Some messages were kind, strangers thanking him for his courage. Others were cruel, death threats, slurred DMs that said, "Go back to the projects, thief," or "You ruined a good man's career for clout." His school received a bomb threat 3 days after the video went viral. The building was evacuated, and police swept the premises while students sat trembling on sidewalks. Caiden sat quietly in the back of a cruiser, not in custody, just hidden, protected, or at least that's what they told him. But he didn't feel safe. Not anywhere. Royce stayed close. Denise refused to leave his side. "Let them try to take you," she said, her voice steep. "They'll go through me first." Still, the attacks escalated. Harvard alumni began debating whether Caiden had violated institutional decorum. Some professors quietly blacklisted his name from summer program recommendation. One Ivy League scholar tweeted, "Genius doesn't excuse breach of protocol," to which thousands replied, "Neither does theft." Amid the chaos, Caiden found himself locked in emotional limbo, too seen to disappear, too discredited to move forward. "I wanted the truth out," he told Royce one night, "but not like this, not with bomb squads and hashtags." Royce, sitting beside him, stared into the dark. "You think you're being punished for the math, but you're being punished for the audacity to own it." For days, Caiden tried to hold steady. He wrote, journaled, reworked formulas, trying to find solace in the numbers again. But the numbers had changed, They weren't just comfort now. They were evidence, currency, power, and that terrified the machine that once ignored him. Then came the twist no one saw coming. An email, no subject, sent to Caiden's encrypted inbox by a sender called M433M meant. It read, "I saw everything. I've stayed quiet long enough. I was in the meeting when your name was removed from the draft. I have the original file, the one with your name. They buried it, but I didn't." Caiden froze. His heart thudded in his chest as he read it over and over again. Attached was a PDF. He clicked it. It opened to the full original submission. Title, Recursive, Lattice Theory and Nonlinear Predictive Convergence. Author Caiden Hill. Date, 2 months prior to Moore's paper. It was time-stamped, signed, and saved from a faculty portal. The metadata confirmed it all. Caiden gasped. His hands trembled. He called Royce into the room, then showed it to Denise. No one spoke for a full minute. Royce finally whispered, "This is the nail." Denise's eyes filled. "They tried to make my baby a ghost." Caiden didn't know the whistleblower's name, but their bravery shifted everything. Because now it wasn't just allegations. It wasn't hearsay. It was proof, concrete, digital, inarguable. And what he chose to do with it next could either make him or destroy him. A whistleblower from inside Harvard contacted Caiden. She had the original submission with his name on it. The next day a second message arrived. This time it had a name. "My name is Eliza Truitt. I was a senior academic clerk in the mathematics department for 16 years. What they did to you, they've done before. I stayed quiet. I archived everything. But I can't carry it anymore. Meet me." Caiden sat frozen as he read the words out loud. Royce leaned over his shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "That name, Eliza, she used to work in admin. Real quiet. People thought she left for health reasons." Denise raised her brow. "You think it's legit?" Caiden nodded slowly. "Only someone inside would know the file format they used." She attached another doc. He clicked open the second file, his original submission again, but this time with visible internal stamps. The top corner in red ink read, "Raise a sign, no credit." Caiden's chest tightened. There it was, in clinical bureaucratic terms, the official erasure of his name. Royce hissed through his teeth. "That's a death sentence to authorship." Caiden's hands were shaking, but his voice stayed steady. "She said she archived everything, not just me." They met Eliza 2 days later in a quiet cafe, an hour outside Cambridge. She wore a plain cardigan, her eyes heavy with years of silence, her hands trembling slightly, as she slid a worn leather briefcase across the table. "There are names in here you won't believe," she said softly. "They've been doing this since 1983. Black students submit raw research, and if it's too advanced, too disruptive, they reassign it, always to someone tenured, usually white. Then they bury the originals in a private archive." Caiden opened the folder inside and saw names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, some labeled no attribution. Every case had similar tags: reviewed, recommend transfer, needs author reassignment, delay public access, and the coldest one of all, not viable under current demographics. Denise blinked back tears. "How is this legal?" Eliza laughed without humor. "It's not, but it's internal. And they've always counted on one thing. Black brilliance is easier to erase than explain." Among the files was Royce's original proof from 1998, stamped with a near-identical phrase, flagged for faculty redirection. Royce stared at it, silent. His hand gripped the edge of the table. For a second he looked like he couldn't breathe. "They documented it," he said finally. "They actually documented stealing it." Eliza leaned in, urgency in her voice. "You have to go public. With all of it, your case is the matchstick. But the fire's bigger than you." Caiden nodded slowly. "What will they do to you?" Eliza smiled, sad and tired. "They already did. They erased me from the system. I couldn't get hired anywhere after I refused to destroy the originals. They claimed I breached protocol, blackballed me from academia. I lost everything except this archive." She tapped the briefcase. "If I'm going down, they're going with me." That night, Caiden, Royce, and Denise stayed up scanning the documents, verifying metadata and cataloging everything. 43 names, 22 papers, multiple awards and citations tied to reassigned black student research. Harvard had built empires on invisible labor. Caiden's rage simmered quietly beneath his focus. The next morning, they shared the archive with an investigative journalist at The Guardian. 2 days later, the expose went live. Buried Brilliance: How Harvard Systematically Stole the Work of Black Students for 4 Decades. The article exploded. Screenshots of the internal memos went viral. Eliza's testimony was published in full. They had it all: the emails, the time-stamped submissions, the R-assigned stamps, the stolen credits. National media couldn't ignore it anymore. CNN ran a special segment. MSNBC held a panel with Royce, Caiden and Eliza. For the first time, Caiden's name appeared beside the words author, inventor and originator. The math community fractured in response. Some professors doubled down, calling it a smear campaign, but many broke rank. An MIT scholar posted, "I've seen this firsthand. Caiden's not an outlier. He's the proof of a pattern." Then the twist none of them expected. A Senate subcommittee on education and intellectual property announced a formal inquiry. The lead senator, a black woman from Georgia, tweeted, "If institutions are stealing genius from our kids, then they're stealing from the future of this country. We will investigate Harvard and every school like it." Caiden sat in silence as the clip played on TV. Royce exhaled slowly. "You lit the fire, son." Caiden didn't respond. He stared at the file still open on his laptop, his name on his own math, finally visible. But his hands trembled, not from fear anymore, from the weight of what came next. National media picked up the story, and Congress announced an investigation. The morning of the Senate hearing was unlike anything Caiden had ever experienced. The air outside the Capitol was thick with tension and camera flashes. And as he stepped out of the car with Royce on one side and Eliza on the other, he felt the weight of a history that had always happened in shadows now being dragged into the light. The halls were cold, wide, echoing with whispered agendas and last-minute calls, but Caiden walked steadily, not with rehearsed confidence but with the kind of quiet strength built from every humiliation, every theft, every time someone called him a fraud while building careers off his mind. The hearing room was packed, press in every corner, scholars from universities across the country, and staffers lined against the walls. Behind the panel sat the Senate Subcommittee on Education, headed by Senator Denise Arrington, the same black woman who had tweeted support after Eliza's archive went public. She watched Caiden with a kind of stern warmth, nodding once before the microphone buzzed to life. "We are here," she said, "because this country claims to value intellect, merit and innovation, but not all minds have been treated equally. Today we address not just theft but systemic silencing." Eliza testified first, her voice calm, her evidence meticulous. She walked the committee through timelines, submission processes, the RE assigned tags, and internal memos instructing junior staff to withhold credit when visibility poses demographic conflict. Her testimony felt like a scalpel, precise, undeniable, and cutting through the polished skin of institutional respectability. Royce went next. His voice trembled at first but found its footing in anger. "They told me I wasn't ready," he said. "What they meant was I wasn't white enough to be undeniable." He handed the senators his original proof from 1998, and the email from the professor who had once promised to mentor him, only to take his work and publish under a different name. The room held its breath. Then Caiden stepped up, just 16, in a fitted suit he had borrowed from a neighbor, with hands slightly shaking but eyes locked forward. He didn't read from notes. He didn't quote law. He told his story. The laughter in class, the first viral equation, the fake praise, the moment Harvard took his name and gave it to a man who couldn't even explain the math. "I wasn't supposed to be brilliant," he said. "Not here. Not at that level. That's why they took my name. They weren't just afraid of my mind. They were afraid of what it meant if I was right." When he finished, the room fell into stunned silence. Then came the wave. National headlines, international coverage, think pieces titled "The Theft of Black Genius." And when the Ivy League erases, social media turned Caiden into a symbol, part cautionary tale, part revolution. Other victims came forward. Dozens of former students from other elite schools who had seen their work redirected, citations denied, or careers quietly derailed. Harvard scrambled. First came the apology, a press release filled with euphemisms, unfortunate oversights, procedural misjudgments, breakdowns in internal attribution. Then came the task force, led by faculty who had long upheld the very systems under fire. They offered to expand recognition protocols. Not a single resignation, not a single fired official. Caiden's name still hadn't been restored on the official academic record. When his mother read the release, she laughed bitterly. "They stole your name and now want to give you a footnote," she said. "You're not a footnote." Despite the public support and the Senate pressure, Harvard's legal team played defense. They argued that departmental oversight was not systemic racism. That Arya sign didn't mean that Caiden had signed away authorship under voluntary anonymity. Never mind the documented pressure. Their statement ended with, "While we regret any misunderstanding, we stand by the integrity of our faculty." The damage to their image was irreversible, but the institution itself remained untouchable. Caiden was exhausted. He didn't want to become a symbol anymore. He just wanted peace, purpose, and the credit he earned. That's when the offer came. Quietly, discreetly, a private donor, unnamed, but clearly connected, reached out through a third-party law firm. The terms were simple: a $10 million settlement in exchange for a full non-disclosure agreement. No interviews, no books, no speeches, no further public appearances tied to the scandal. In return, a foundation would be set up in Caiden's name to support future scholars of color. On paper, it was generosity. In truth, it was hush money. Denise looked at the envelope when the courier dropped it at their doorstep. "They want to buy your silence," she said. Not surprised. Caiden stared at the letter, the number, the smooth legal language. 10 million, more than enough to change their lives, pay every debt, secure any future. But the weight of that money pressed on his chest like a coffin lid. "They want to bury me in gold," he said quietly. "But I'll still be buried." A private donor offered Caiden $10 million to never speak about the scandal again. The offer sat on the kitchen table like a loaded weapon. $10 million printed in clean legal language, buried beneath paragraphs of silence. No more interviews, no more hearings, no more justice. Just a check, a name erased, and the comfort of pretending none of it had ever happened. Caiden stared at it for hours, the paper untouched, the ink too clean for how dirty it felt. Royce paced the living room, jaw clenched, saying nothing. Denise, meanwhile, sat with her arms folded, a storm of guilt and survival battling behind her eyes. "We could build everything," she whispered once. "A house, a future, a school with your name. No more begging, no more depending. We could walk away rich, baby." Caiden didn't answer. He heard the weariness in her voice, decades of struggle disguised as pragmatism. He couldn't blame her. Life had never handed her a single easy choice. But this choice wasn't about comfort. It was about conscience. What kept echoing in Caiden's head was a question he couldn't shake. What is the value of truth in a world built to destroy the people who speak it? That night, sleep evaded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw headlines rewritten, his face replaced with Moore's, his future bought and silenced like so many before him. Around 2 a.m., unable to breathe under the weight of the decision, he walked quietly into the study Royce had claimed as his own. Royce wasn't there, but his old boxes were memories buried in dust and resignation. Caiden opened one, then another, digging past old journals and equations, until he found something folded deep beneath a bundle of yellowed lecture notes. A letter in a sealed envelope with Royce's handwriting on the front. It read, "To whoever finds me." Caiden's hands trembled as he opened it. The note inside was short, written in stiff, slanted lines. "They erased me, not because I was wrong, but because I was too right in the wrong skin. I tried to scream, but no one listened. If you find this, I probably lost the will to keep begging for humanity. But know this, what they fear most is not our anger, it's our intellect. Don't ever let them convince you your silence is the price of peace." Caiden felt the words pierce through his chest like a blade. Royce had written this when he was still young, still fighting, long before Caiden ever knew his name. A note prepared for surrender, but never sent. Caiden sat back, the weight of it suffocating. Royce hadn't taken his life, but he had once considered it, and the same reason now staring Caiden in the face. A system that steals, denies, then bribes its victims into silence. Morning light was breaking when Caiden made his decision. He walked to his laptop, opened the envelope from the law firm, and photographed the offer. Then he took a photo of Royce's letter. No edits, no captions, just truth. He uploaded both to Twitter with a single sentence. "This is the price they offered to erase me. But I'm not for sale." The post hit the internet like a meteor. Within minutes, it spread like fire. Tens of thousands retweeted. Celebrities amplified it. Academics issued statements of solidarity. Even journalists who had stayed cautious before now leaned fully in, demanding Harvard account not just for the past, but for the bribe. Royce woke up to his own words on every screen in the house. He stood frozen, eyes wide as if someone had pulled a thread from his soul and woven it into the world. Denise hugged her son tight, sobbing not just from pride but from fear. "You just made enemies," she whispered. "The kind that wear suits and smile on camera." Caiden nodded. "Let them come." Caiden posted the letter online, and the world erupted again. The post detonated across the globe, but it was the silence from Harvard that became the loudest sound of all. No denial, no counterstatement, no apology, just strategic quiet, hoping the storm would pass like all others before it. But this time, it didn't. Caiden's tweet ignited something deeper than outrage. It triggered a reckoning. On campuses from coast to coast, Black students who had felt invisible their entire academic lives finally saw themselves in someone who refused to be erased. Within 72 hours, Black graduate students at Columbia, Yale, and Princeton drafted a joint statement titled "We Will Not Be Footnotes," calling for immediate investigations into academic erasure, historical theft, and unequal authorship attribution. What started as a letter became a wave. Dozens of universities were named, receipts surfaced, old projects, faculty emails, unexplained authorship switches. Professors who had once been untouchable found their careers suddenly spotlighted. Students refused to attend classes taught by faculty linked to suspicious citations. Then came the walkouts. It began at Harvard. At exactly 200 Black undergraduates and a handful of faculty silently rose from their chairs and walked out of lectures, labs, and offices, assembling in the center courtyard with nothing but signs reading, "We are not your data." Credit Caiden. Black brilliance is not institutional property. Within a day, the movement spread. At Cornell, Brown, Stanford, even MIT, thousands of Black scholars walked out in coordinated protest. Social media was flooded with footage, chants echoing through lecture halls, protest banners hanging from stone buildings, faculty confronting administration. The most viral moment came from a student at the University of Chicago, who stood in the middle of her campus library and shouted, "If a Black boy can change the world with one equation, then we demand a world that doesn't punish him for it." Donors began pulling funding. Alumni issued open letters. Ivy League boards scrambled into emergency meetings. Harvard, desperate to regain control, extended a last-minute olive branch. They would award Caiden an honorary doctorate in mathematics, in recognition of his undeniable contribution to the field. The email came with a draft of the press release. It read, "Harvard is proud to acknowledge Caiden Hill's valuable insights, which helped reinforce the foundations of a critical theorem." Caiden read it once, twice, and pushed the laptop away. "They're still trying to write me in as an assistant," he said. "Not the originator." Royce, watching from across the room, said nothing. Denise muttered, "Honor without honesty is just decoration." That night, Caiden drafted his reply. It was 2 sentences long. "I respectfully decline. I'm not interested in recognition that sanitizes the truth." He didn't expect what came next. The following afternoon, an unmarked envelope was delivered to their door with a small MIT logo in the corner. Inside was a formal letter signed by the chair of the Department of Mathematics and the university president. It offered Caiden something he hadn't even dreamed of. Not at this age. Not after what he'd endured. A full professorship. Not honorary. Not symbolic. A tenured position, faculty, research lab, office, and academic freedom at 17. Royce read the letter twice. "They're serious," he said. Caiden's hands trembled. "They want me. As me." Denise covered her mouth, overcome. Then she whispered, "Baby, they want your mind. But now on your terms." MIT offered Caiden a full professorship. At just the morning Caiden walked onto MIT's campus. He wasn't just a 17-year-old with a backpack and a notebook. He was Professor Caiden Hill, the youngest tenured faculty member in United States history. Yet instead of ceremony or press flashes, he asked for something simple. No spotlight, just space to build. MIT agreed. But he had one more condition before signing the appointment letter. Sitting across from the university president, Caiden looked him squarely in the eye and said, "I'll teach, I'll publish, I'll research, but I want a lab of my own. Not for me, for kids who were never supposed to reach me. A math institute. Free, open to underserved Black youth. No gatekeeping, no tests to prove they're worthy, just access." The president hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's ambitious," he said. Caiden replied, "So was surviving." Within weeks, construction began on a glass-walled center 2 blocks from MIT's main library. It would be called the Hill Lab for Mathematical Justice. Royce helped draft the curriculum. Denise handled outreach. And Eliza, now working as a full-time research librarian, curated the first wave of textbooks, most of which had long erased the contributions of Black scholars. By day, Caiden taught undergraduates and mentored graduate researchers. By night, he sat cross-legged in the lab, with 12-year-olds who reminded him of his younger self, full of untapped fire, silenced by the same institutions that once tried to bury him. One boy named Jameer solved a level 4 vector riddle in under 7 minutes. When Caiden asked how he did it, Jameer shrugged and said, "I just heard it in my head." Caiden smiled, remembering, "Keep listening. That's your language." Over time, news outlets tried to refocus the narrative. MIT's prodigy, the boy genius who shook the Ivy League, from victim to visionary. But Caiden refused to let the world soften the edges. He always told the full truth about the theft, the trauma, the silence they offered to buy, and the institutions that had fed on black brilliance for decades. His lectures weren't just about equations, they were about power, how it gets distributed, and who it gets stolen from. Students once disengaged began lining up after class just to talk, not about math, about being seen. But in the midst of this rising respect and fragile healing, an envelope arrived without a return address. It was thick, handwritten, sealed with red wax. Inside was a folded letter, written in cursive, so shaky it almost collapsed off the page. Caiden read the first line, and froze. To the boy they tried to erase. "I owe you the truth." It was signed by Lennox, one of the original Harvard faculty members, who had overseen the internal theft of Caiden's work. The man had vanished from public life after the scandal broke, resigning quietly and retreating into obscurity. The letter was a confession, not just of what they did to Caiden, but of what Lennox had done to dozens of black students before him. He admitted to rerouting original research through white proxies. He detailed specific files, names and dates, but it wasn't just data. It was "I told myself I was protecting the institution," he wrote, "but really I was protecting the lie, that genius is only valid when it looks like me. I see now that I helped build a graveyard of black minds. And you, Caiden, you refused to stay buried. I'm sorry." Caiden sat with the letter in silence. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he simply exhaled. The confession wouldn't undo the years lost, or the names never remembered. But it was a crack in the marble, proof that even the architects of erasure couldn't outrun their conscience forever. Still, he hadn't decided what to do with it, because sometimes, even truth must wait its turn. A former Harvard professor sent a secret letter begging for forgiveness. Caiden didn't publish the letter right away. He kept it folded in a locked drawer in his MIT office, revisiting it in private like a scar he couldn't stop tracing. The handwriting was fragile, but the words cut like steel. "Your work is the most original I've ever seen in my academic life. And I didn't just ignore it. I buried it. Not because it was flawed, but because it terrified me. Because you proved what I wasn't ready to admit, that racism cost me my soul long before it cost you your credit." Dr. Lennox's confession was many things: cowardly, overdue, raw, but most of all, it was truth from the inside. Caiden knew it was time. The world had seen the hashtags, the protests, the walkouts, the scandal, but what they hadn't seen yet was the full anatomy of betrayal. So he began writing, not as revenge, but as resurrection. For every black genius who never got a chance to write their own name into the world. For Eliza, for the boy he used to be, the one who whispered he loved math in a room that laughed at him. Over the next 8 months, Caiden poured himself into pages, not just the story of the stolen proof, but the deeper wounds, the look in his teacher's eyes when he said basketball, not math, the silence that followed every time he answered a question too quickly, the internal war between staying quiet to survive and speaking out to exist. The book, titled Wrong Answer: How They Tried to Erase a Black Genius, was part memoir, part manifesto, and part mathematical map of erasure. Each chapter was named after a variable: X for excluded, Y for yielded, Z for zeroed out, the final variable, F, for fought. He included full-page scans of Royce's old equations, the letter from Dr. Lennox, the screenshots from Harvard's ARIA sign file tags, and even the $10 million NDA offer, marked with the words "declined." With prejudice, Caiden refused a traditional publisher. He released the book under his own imprint, printing only 1,000 copies at first, thinking it would live quietly in academic circles. But the internet had other plans. The first printing sold out in 5 hours. Then came the second. Within 3 weeks, Wrong Answer hit 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, sitting above celebrity memoirs and political exposés. School districts requested classroom sets. Black bookstores reported lines around the block. MIT held a public reading on campus, where Caiden read the passage about the moment he was laughed at in middle school. Afterward, a group of kids stood up in the back and clapped until their palms turned red. Critics called it one of the most important American memoirs of the decade. But Caiden didn't care about the critics. He cared about the letters, hundreds of them, from kids who finally saw themselves in the pages, From parents who cried reading it out loud. From professors who admitted they'd looked away too long. But one letter stopped him cold. It came from an inmate in Louisiana, handwritten in pencil on lined paper. I failed math 3 times, thought I was dumb, read your book through the prison library, solved the first problem in your appendix. I cried, thank you for showing me I'm not a mistake. Caiden wept, because that was the legacy they had tried to erase. Not just his name, but the belief that someone like him could ever matter. And yet here he was, visible, powerful, unowned. Still, the very last chapter of Wrong Answer did something unexpected. It didn't end with closure, it ended with a riddle. In small italicized text beneath the acknowledgements, Caiden wrote, to those who believe this was only about the past, think again. There's a pattern I've been following, one that doesn't just shift mathematics, but physics. The numbers are whispering something new, and this time, I'm listening louder than ever. The final chapter hinted at a new theory he'd been working on, one that could change physics forever. The first time Caiden stood in front of the broken fence outside his old middle school in Mississippi, he just stared. The chipped paint, the sagging basketball net, the cafeteria window he used to press his notebook against during lunch so he could work in peace. It was all still there, exactly as he remembered it. Except now, he wasn't that boy anymore. He wasn't hiding his brilliance, he was building a legacy from it. Beside him, Roy stood silently, his eyes glassy. You sure about this? He asked. Caiden nodded. It started here. It has to return here. In partnership with MIT and with donations from thousands who had followed his story, Caiden opened the Royce Center for Mathematical Equity, a glass and steel structure planted directly beside the old school building. Its walls transparent by design so no brilliance would ever be hidden again. The name was non-negotiable. You were the first one who told me I wasn't crazy for seeing the numbers the way I did. Caiden told Royce at the ribbon cutting. This is yours as much as mine. At the ceremony, Denise stood beside her son in a fitted suit, tears threatening but never falling. From statistical anomaly to center founder, she whispered with pride. You flipped the math on them. The center offered free tutoring, advanced theoretical classes, coding labs, and most important, a room simply called the proof room, where students could scribble their ideas without judgment. The whiteboards wrapped around the entire space like a canvas. Caiden made sure every kid knew this wasn't just for students. It was for thinkers, dreamers, anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong in brilliance. One afternoon, a familiar voice called out from the doorway, Desmond, the boy who once laughed loudest in class when Caiden said he loved math. Now taller, quieter, holding a young daughter's hand. I was an idiot, he said barely above a whisper. Caiden didn't blink. So were they, he replied. But you showed up, that's what matters now. Desmond signed up for night classes. His daughter joined the weekend STEM camp. And so the circle turned. Harvard never recovered. Its rankings dipped, applications slowed, and its own black faculty filed lawsuits citing decades of invisible theft. They tried to pivot, launched diversity panels, renamed wings of buildings, and offered shallow tributes to emerging voices. But the world saw through. They had built their name off stolen minds, and no donation could clean that history now. Still, Caiden rarely spoke of Harvard anymore. He had no interest in revenge, just velocity, the forward kind. He spent most of his days between MIT and the Royce Center, mentoring a new generation, and writing a quiet theory that had taken root in his mind like a haunting, something deeper than lattice patterns, bigger than correction, a language beneath language, an equation beneath equation. He didn't talk about it, not yet, not until it was whole, and when it finally was, he didn't announce it online, he didn't publish it in a journal, he simply invited a few people to a private lecture at MIT. Just a quiet room, 20 chairs and a single title on the board, Unified Motion Hypothesis, reconsidering the structure of time in predictive space. Among the invitees were professors from Stanford, Princeton, and Caltech, but most notably, 4 Nobel laureates in physics sat in the front row, arms folded, eyes skeptical. Caiden walked to the front. No introductions, no ego, just the equation. He started slow, explaining how traditional theories break down under extreme compression, and how his lattice understanding from mathematics could reframe particle behavior across dimensions. He spoke in metaphors, but the numbers were precise. The room leaned. At minute 47, he flipped the final page of his notebook and revealed the core formula, a single line that twisted accepted reality into something almost lyrical. For a full minute, no one moved. Then one of the laureates, a man who hadn't asked a question in years, slowly stood and said, Can you prove that? Caiden smiled. I already did. I just need someone willing to look beyond the shape of the mouth that said it. And then the lights dimmed. The room remained silent, not out of disbelief, but reverence, because something new had been born, not just from intellect, but from pain, resilience, and a refusal to vanish. In a darkened lecture hall, Caiden unveiled a formula that silenced a room of Nobel laureates. No child should have to fight this hard, just to be seen. No mind should be erased because of the color it comes from. If Caiden's story moved you, if you've